one.
Guess what we're talking about today? Indeed, friends. Discussing philosophy and Star Wars, we are. But before we do that, let me just take a moment to introduce my co-host for today, our very own Jedi Master of Objectivism, and 900 years old you will reach? Look this good, you will not.
I will, yes. This is about what you'll look when you get 900, I promise. No, thank you, Nicholas. Hi.
James Valliant, how are you doing today?
I'm quite well, sir. I hope the force is with you as well.
I certainly hope so as well. So first of all, before we get into our topic today, I want to say and give a big thank you to our sponsors for today's episode, Quent Cordair Fine Arts. And I'll have a little bit more to say about them in the middle and at the end of the episode. Now, James, when we talked last week about Lord of the Rings, you mentioned that you had some very particular ideas about the role of philosophy in the Star Wars series, and specifically a kind of a clash between the explicit philosophy as it's in the screenplay expressed by some of the characters, compared with how it's embodied in the actual plot, in the actual the action of the story. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, first, let me say that preface all of my remarks, which may come out to be quite critical of the storytelling in the Star Wars films, by saying that when in 1977, when I was but 13 years old, I was there at opening day of the first Star Wars film, the original Star Wars film in 1977. I was there at the Chinese Theater on Hollywood Boulevard, standing in line to see it on opening day. Because in the context of the 1970s, the cultural wasteland that there was the 1970s, Star Wars was actually a very positive value. It may have been simple, kind of bootleg romanticism, as Ayn Rand would call it, but I think it actually qualifies as bootleg romanticism. When the musicals are as grim as Cabaret, and when the best films being made are naturalist things like The Godfather, that was the good stuff. that was the high end stuff Hollywood was producing in the 70s. It was getting very grim and depressing, and Americans wanted heroes, villains, good guys, bad guys. The music you played, what an incredible! There are so many great values to Star Wars. Its editing, it was the technical effects, the fact that there were good guys and bad guys drawn. That music, that amazing music that John Williams always shows up for and writes for these amazing movies. So with that out of the way, I just want to say that it was a wonderful experience for me as a kid. I loved those movies in one sense, at one level. I was conscious that the philosophy was different than mine, that Yoda, for example, in the Jedi philosophy, well, this whole mysticism of the Force, I knew that there were philosophical issues that I totally disagreed with, but I was able to set those mentally aside, as I often can do with movies or literature. And I think we should, even as objectivists, to get the actual value, to see the moral themes and the moral values. We can't be blinded by our philosophy and say, oh, well, there's something mystical going on, so I'm just going to dismiss any value it might have. I think that would be a mistake. So it's not the philosophy of Yoda that was my main problem, which a lot of objectivists have, is this whole philosophy of the Jedi and this whole magical metaphysics. That's not my problem. Ayn Rand, in the Romantic Manifesto, when she developed her own theory of art, in particular her own theory of literature and drama, she believed that the artwork stood on its own, regardless of the artist's intentions. So, for example, a story will have a theme, and that theme will be the result of the events as the author presents them, whether that author knows that's the theme or not. Ayn Rand used the example of Thomas Mann, the novelist, and his book, The Magic Mountain. For what plot there is in The Magic Mountain, it's usually discussed more than actually shown. But the plot actually it says something and is entirely different from all of these speeches that the characters will be talking about. The characters will talk one set of ideas in philosophy, and those will have nothing to do with, or in fact be in direct contradiction to the events of the story, what the events are saying. So Ayn Rand would say that there's such a thing as plot theme The plot is what tells you the theme. It's not the words that come out of even the hero's mouth or the wisest person in the story's mouth. In fact, the two can often be in flat contradiction, and that's a sign in Ayn Rand's mind of poor storytelling. It's the storyteller, it's the dramatist not knowing what his events actually say. And when you compare that to the Star Wars films, now let's get to the Star Wars films. My problem with it is on a storytelling basis. The philosophy that's coming out of the wise Yoda Jedi Master's mouth is belied by the actual events of the story, directly contradicted by the story. I do not think that was George Lucas's intent. I think if you were to ask George Lucas from the outset, do you want Yoda to look like a fool? Do you want the events to show that Yoda was an idiot and wrong? He would say, no, Yoda's wise. Yoda's telling us the truth. And he would never even see in his own mind the contradiction between what's coming out of Yoda's mouth and what the events of his story are telling. My first clue into this problem began, I think, in the second of the movies. Many regard it as the best. I think it is probably the best of the Star Wars films, The Empire Strikes Back. In The Empire Strikes Back, that's where we meet Yoda. And Luke the spoiler alerts all over the place, but this is familiar literature, I think, to millions and millions of people. But there will be
hasn't seen these movies, seriously.
Right? Yeah. Yoda, Luke goes to his special training, Yoda training. Luke has got to become a Jedi Knight, so he's got to go find a Jedi Master, and the last one around is Yoda, and he's getting special training from Yoda. And Luke is beginning to have visions of his friends being in trouble. And he's got to leave the training. He says, no, I've got to go help my friends, Master Yoda. And Yoda says, no, don't do it. Don't do it. If you do, you'll be destroying everything that they fight for. And if you really care about this, you'll let your friends die if necessary for it. So you can't go help your friends. Helping your friends, you see, there's something suspicious about going out and selfishly helping your friends. But it turns out Yoda's dead wrong. Of course, Luke goes, we see in the third film, Luke goes away, saves Han Solo, helps his friends, comes back, is able to complete no, in fact, Yoda says, you know all that you need to know. There's no more training you need. Apparently, he got it out there all on his own. Yoda was dead wrong. Luke was able to go help his friends and come back successfully. And so that creates, in my mind, a tremendous problem. The Yoda suggests, and this is what George Lucas himself also suggests, is away from even the films itself, George Lucas saying, he was deeply influenced by Joseph Campbell and his work on worldwide mythology. And he was deeply influenced by Buddhism. And so Yoda is presenting this philosophy where if you care too much, fear of loss, he explains, is a road to the dark side. We can't be too committed to things. We can't be too attached to things. It's our attachment to our values, and it's this fear of loss. You can see the connections to Buddhism and Stoicism here. That we have to avoid. That'll lead us to the dark side. So don't the caring too much about your friends. You see, Luke, that'll get you into trouble. But it turns out in the events that it didn't. Now let's back up and look at all of the first 6 films that George Lucas did. Now we get the full background on the Jedi philosophy, where we're explicitly told by Yoda that fear of loss is a path to the dark side. Don't be too committed to things. In fact, Anakin Skywalker explains to Padme, who he's falling in love with at the time, we're supposed to love everybody in general, but no one in particular. And so they're forbidden from having romantic personal relationships. And Anakin has to keep his love of Padme secret, his marriage with Padme secret. And that's what gives the Sith the opening to convert Anakin to the dark side. Were it not Jedi rule against...
Yeah, it's partly that and partly the bad acting of Hayden Christensen that leaves it.
Well, this is true, but let's just go by what was said explicitly. The Jedi philosophy prevents Anakin, because of this rule against personal attachments and getting too close to anyone in particular. He's got to hide his relationship, and it's in the act of hiding his relationship that opens him up to being tempted by the Emperor and going to the dark side. So again and again and again, we're told that the Jedi philosophy is no personal connections. Personal connections are to be feared. They're dangerous. We hear it from Yoda again and again and again. We're given even a little ground to believe that because it's Anakin in the first three films, the prequel films, episodes 1, 2, and 3, Anakin's fear of his mother, you see. Instead of having the Jedi go save his mother from slavery, they let this fear of mother hang over his head. I mean, what the heck are the Jedi there for if they're not freeing people from slavery? In any event, that was my own thinking at the time. But in any event, let's just go with it. His fear of his mother is actually causing him to get angry. But they're not process. The Jedi are in no way helping poor Anakin process this fear of loss of his mother, which is a real thing. They're not even acknowledging it. And when it comes to Padme, he absolutely has to hide his personal connection. And now we can see in retrospect that Yoda's statement, "Don't go help your friends, Luke," is part of this wider philosophy. Getting too close to someone, caring too much, that fear of loss, that's the danger. That's when we're really in trouble. And that's the big Jedi rule that we have to fight against. Now look at the actual events. At the end, the climactic, in the 6 films that George Lucas did, not the three most recent, how does it end? Luke confronts the Emperor, Luke confronts Darth Vader, but of course he's not going to fight Darth Vader until Darth Vader threatens his sister. Aha! You have a twin sister, and if you won't go to the dark side, maybe she will. And it's at that second that Luke gets angry and says, "No, you're not going to get my sister." And he finally does the battle, and he defeats Darth Vader precisely because he's protecting his sister. He has a particular bond with a particular person, and that's what defeats Darth Vader. And then the Emperor, he won't kill Darth Vader. He's not quite dead yet. The Emperor says, "Aha, take your father's place at my side and join me in the Sith." And Luke says, "No, I'm a Jedi like my father before me." Aha, zap, zap, zap. The Emperor's killing Luke. What happens? Luke cries out, "Father, Father, help me." And it's because Darth Vader's son is being killed by the Emperor that Darth Vader pushes the Emperor over the abyss. And that's the end of, at least in the first 6 films, the end of the Emperor. And that's what defeats the Emperor. So were it not for the unique personal bonds between Luke and Leia, Luke would never have defeated Vader. Were it not for the unique personal bond between Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker, the Emperor would never have been defeated. So, in fact, the plot theme is telling us that what's all important is our commitment to our personal connections, to those selfish, personal, that fear of loss of Leia saved the Empire. The fear of loss on Darth Vader's part of Luke saved the galaxy. In fact, Yoda's philosophy is exactly wrong. Yoda's philosophy is ridiculed through the events. There can be no question that the plot theme stresses the importance of friendship, we can see this in lesser characters like Lando Calrissian. We can see it in fact, when you step back and you look at the first 6 films of Star Wars, you'd have to say to yourself, well, friendship, loyalty, devotion to your personal values is what saves the world.
And I think that's
saves the galaxy, and yet Yoda's constantly telling us the opposite. And so now let's back up even further. This is all a prophecy. The midi-chlorians, the Force, they've got this all worked out from the beginning, and it's simply the fulfillment of some ancient prophecy we're led to believe. Well, if that's the case, then we can only come to one conclusion. The midi-chlorians, realizing that the Jedi have this horrible anti-life philosophy, have to wipe out the Jedi. And then, of course, they have to wipe out the Sith because the Sith have a bad philosophy. It's as though the midi-chlorians are making a huge object lesson in the events of the first 6 Star Wars films, saying personal relationships matter. Don't be so afraid of loss that you don't fall in love and that you're not committed and you don't go out and help your friends and risk your life for your values. Exactly the opposite of everything that Yoda says and stands for.
And how much of this stoical philosophy that you find expressed by Yoda, you think might have roots in something like a mind-body dichotomy? So let's take one specific example. There's one actual line in the Empire Strikes Back where Yoda says, "Numinous beings are we, not this crude matter." That's something that really jumped out at me, particularly more recently in thinking of the trilogy in philosophical terms. So how much of that do you think contributes to some of these problems that you're seeing between the plot theme and the explicit philosophy?
Yeah, George Lucas has no clue about what morality is, what moral values are all about, their actual function. To him, it's some mystical thing that applies to some other dimension. So in adopting a mystical worldview, he has inevitably put himself into a theory-practice dichotomy. Inevitably. So if George Lucas, for example, were to hear our discussion here today, he would say, "Oh, that would probably be his response." Well, you see, one can't be perfectly consistent with the ideal. That's impractical. Of course, Yoda's philosophy, if perfectly enacted, will lead to unfortunate consequences. But we've got this theory practice dichotomy built into the universe because, they've got this crude matter over here and this perfect Platonic idealism over here, which inevitably leads to a theory practice dichotomy, so that he doesn't even probably see the problem that I'm pointing out.
But where we don't have any theory practice dichotomy is in the works of art that you can see with our sponsors for today's episode. Quent Cordair Fine Art has been making the world an even more beautiful place for 27 years. Specializing in romantic realist paintings and sculptures, the gallery's collection emphasizes themes which celebrate the moments of happiness, joy, and success possible to man on Earth, not in a galaxy far, far away, but on Earth. Acquire art you will want to live with by visiting them online at cordair.com or in their Napa, California and Jackson, Wyoming locations. The new Ayn Rand portrait prints have arrived. You can visit the link in the description and the pinned comment to get yours today. For every print purchased with the code ARCUK, Quent Cordair Fine Art will donate $25 to Ayn Rand Center UK, and we thank them for their generous contributions. James, there's quite a lot that we can discuss here. Now, one of the ways that I've looked at this dichotomy that you're pointing out between the advice that Yoda gives to Luke and the actions that Luke actually takes is, I've always assumed that Yoda was simply underestimating Luke, thinking that he's not quite yet connected with the Force, that he's not quite mature yet enough to stand up to Darth Vader. Of course, at that point, when Yoda gives him that advice, Luke doesn't quite know the connection between himself and Darth Vader, and Yoda is probably worried that he will either be overpowered by Darth Vader or where he learns the truth about the connection between them, that he won't be able to process it. So I've always interpreted in a more concrete bound sort of way. But you think there's something actually going on beneath the surface here?
No, in fact, he makes it philosophical. In fact, that's actually a very good example of the problem here. They're using, in other words, they're lying. There's no question. I mean, I don't get what word salads that Obi-Wan and Yoda later use. They lie to Luke. They give him a misimpression that his father had been killed by Darth Vader. His father was a good Jedi Knight to the end. And so this image of his heroic father is part of what's inspiring him. So think about it. They're actually using the idea of a personal connection to motivate Luke. Your dad was a good Jedi Knight, and that personal connection should motivate you to be a good Jedi Knight. And if we were to tell you that your dad went bad and was a Sith, that because of that personal connection, you might. So even they are aware that personal connections matter, only they're blind to their own motive about that. So in the lie to Luke, they're in fact aware of how personal connections can affect people. And so they keep Luke in the dark. And guess what? They get it wrong there too. They actually make it, when Luke has to learn it from Darth Vader's own mouth in Empire Strikes Back, that is what subjects him. Why did you lie to me? Is his first question. Obi-Wan, why, Ben, why did you lie? And so now he has to wonder why his Jedi heroes have lied to him this whole time. And now it's undermining his faith in the good. And so, in fact, while they acknowledge this, they're hiding the truth from him about the personal connection. And in fact, that again, once more, this screwed up Jedi philosophy about personal connections is what opens up, not only had it opened up Anakin to being tempted to the dark side, it now opens up the possibility that Luke might go to the dark side. And between the episodes I think it is 5 and 6, Empire and Jedi, we now are wondering, is Luke going to go bad, or is he going to come back and finish his training and so forth? But in doing so, in coming back, in coming back and saying, hey, wait a minute here, why did you lie to me? It puts the total lie to the purpose for their lie. In fact, once more, these wise Jedi masters have screwed up and screwed up big time, because Luke was able to handle just that. In fact, pointing out the personal relationship was key to the very end, the climax. It's the father-son relationship, the brother-sister relationship that actually destroys. It's those personal connections that actually bring down the Sith at the end.
Okay, well, I think there's a lot more we can say about this, but before we get to my next point here, I understand we have some super chats and comments from our audience. So Daniel, can you please fill us in?
So first, thank you, Robert, for your super chat. He says, does capitalism require that we banish the Force? Then Jonathan.
Yeah, go ahead.
Jonathan. Yeah, go on.
Oh, no, I was just saying that fortunately the Force is a mystic thing. It is not
trying to say that a Jedi uses the Force for knowledge and defense, never for attack.
Well, see, now there's a good bit of the philosophy. I don't want to say that the whole of what you're going to hear is bad. And a lot of objectivists can't stand it just because there's this mystic element. I can generally look past a mystic element and see if there's a deeper moral theme, and I would urge people to do that. And if there are other good things that are said along the way, and there are other good things said along the way in Star Wars, it's just that the overall plot theme and the basic philosophy of Yoda are in total conflict with one another. And that's poor storytelling.
Then we have a super chat from Jonathan. Thank you. Another super chat from Robert. Thank you so much. He says, what is the moral status of Darth Vader? How about Anakin Skywalker? I suppose that answering those questions would mean huge spoilers.
Yeah, and
I think we've already given quite a few spoilers.
Yeah, right. I don't think I could have spoiled it anymore when I gave the climax. Now,
and what
I don't like about Star Wars is how they redeem Darth Vader so easily at the end. Darth Vader, we in the prequels, we're led to believe Darth Vader is slaughtering innocent younglings, and I'm, it's going to be hard for me to look past all that. It has a Christian sort of view that on your deathbed you can have a conversion and be redeemed. I don't think that's good enough. Vader helped put the Emperor where he was. His eliminating the Emperor is simply taking one step to fix part of the giant evil that he did, but that doesn't redeem Darth Vader or Anakin from his evil deeds in my mind. So I reject that sort of Christian worldview of deathbed forgiveness of Darth Vader that seems to be part of the story.
You mentioned that George Lucas was influenced by Buddhism. Was he raised a Christian? Do we know much about that?
I'm not actually familiar with that. I know he's a native of the United States, but he was deeply influenced by different world cultures, especially Joseph Campbell's work on myth. He said up front and point blank, Campbell's work influenced him, and you can really see it, I think, in Star Wars. He said up front and point blank, Buddhism is obviously what's behind the Jedi philosophy. I take him at his word because I hear it straight from Yoda's mouth in the film. It's just that those Buddhist type statements fly in the face of what his real theme is: the importance of friendship, loyalty. It's our commitment to one another. It is our close personal bonds that will save the day. It's just a flat contradiction to what it's coming out of Yoda's mouth.
Yeah, but definitely that element of forgiveness and redemption at the end of the sixth film, that definitely strikes me as a distinctly Christian element.
Christian, that does feel Christian, doesn't it? Yeah, no doubt.
Daniel, any other super chats?
And thank you, Robert, again for another super chat. He says, Star Wars mirrors George Lucas's own life and achievements, in that his implicit philosophy is clearly hugely superior to his explicit philosophy.
That's an interesting point.
I agree. I think that what you see with Star Wars is some enormous values, and you can't see those enormous values if those aren't really the creative artist's values. But those were his values. So you say what was done well in Star Wars, well, that's what he put his mind to. If the philosophy and the storytelling is confused, then that's not his forte. It is a weakness in it, but it is a person who's, I think, not clear about philosophy. And when you're not clear about philosophy, your story is going to be kind of contradictory, or your philosophical assertions will turn out to be a confused mess. And so in that regard, Star Wars is a philosophically confused mess. It's a poorly told story in that respect. That does not mean it doesn't have all of these other wonderful pro-life values in it, which I think it do have. After all, the
yeah, I wouldn't say so much that it's a poorly told story, maybe a poorly integrated story.
Poorly integrated.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
It's just that it strikes me so nakedly in the face when I hear Yoda pronounce these things, and I know what the story is saying, that it's hard for me to keep the two going at the same. Oh yeah, Yoda, you are the wise, the source of all wisdom. Try and remember that Yoda is the source. Yeah, Luke has to go get special training from Yoda because he's got the wisdom. All righty then. Even if Luke has to contradict the most fundamental parts of Yoda's philosophy. See, that conflict is something, I'm sorry, I'm a thinking reader, I'm a thinking movie viewer, and I can't help but I'm doing the integration, and I can't integrate that. And I think Lucas, on the other hand, is simply, that's invisible to him, largely. And so I wouldn't say it was act of malice on Lucas's part. Lucas just doesn't know, in effect, what he's doing in terms of conveying a philosophical message. That's the way I'd put it.
But you know who does know what they're doing when it comes to conveying a philosophical message? Our sponsors for today's episode, Quent Cordair Fine Art. Quent Cordair Fine Art has been making the world an even more beautiful place for 27 years. Specializing in romantic realist paintings and sculptures, the gallery's collection emphasizes themes which celebrate the moments of happiness, joy, and success possible to man on Earth. Acquire art you will want to live with by visiting them online at cordair.com or in their Napa, California and Jackson, Wyoming locations. The new Ayn Rand portrait prints have arrived. You can visit the link in the description and the pinned comment to get yours today. For every print purchased with the code ARCUK, Quent Cordair Fine Art will donate $25 to Ayn Rand Center UK. Thank you so much for everything you do for this channel and for all your work within our community as well. And speaking of thank yous, I understand from Daniel that we have some more super chats and some more comments from our beloved viewers.
So first, thank you, Owen, for your super chat. He says psychological versus philosophical devotion to values.
Well, I think it's more than that. I think it's more than just a psychological. See, it's in our actions that it comes out. And Yoda is saying, don't go help, stay here with the training. In Empire Strikes Back, he says, don't go help. Imagine if Luke had taken Yoda's advice, Han Solo would be dead. Han Solo would be dead. And whatever else happened with the Empire, Han Solo, his friend, would be dead. Yoda just turns out to be flat wrong. Luke is able to go help his friends, save Han Solo, come back, and still bring down the Empire in the third film. So Yoda's just flat wrong, and there's no way around it. And it's existential, and that's why I'm stressing the existential devotion to our values is what's demonstrated to be the thing that works. If I maybe have misunderstood the question, but it really is in the Yoda is giving practical advice. Don't do this. Doing it worked out. He was just wrong in practice.
Yeah, I think there's much more we could say about this. In fact, I think we're far from exhausting the philosophical potential of this particular topic. Daniel has suggested that we could possibly do a follow-up episode next week or sometime in the near future. I would certainly be keen on doing that. So I see we're getting close to the top of the hour. The reality show is coming up in a few minutes. Daniel, any final announcements or super chats before we sign off today?
I'm just going to read out the super chats and we'll have to quit right after that and continue with the reality show, but we definitely should have another episode since a lot of people like it. So 3 super chats from Wes, all for $10. So thank you so much. He says in the first one, to George Lucas, the light side is selflessness and the dark side is selfish, which doesn't make sense since Luke wanted to save and redeem his father, and that resulted in evil being vanquished. The second one, but I love Star Wars nonetheless. It's fascinating stuff. And the third one, and we can't forget that George Lucas is one hell of a businessman. Thank you so much for all the super chats.
Yeah, thank you all very much. Thank you to all our viewers and supporters. James, As always, thank you for your insights. I look forward to continuing this discussion very soon, perhaps next week. And with that, all of you be well. May the force be with you.
May the force